A reminder that the content of this video is not endorsed by the VCAA.
Hello everyone, my name is Anand and I'm a former student of VCE French. Today I'll be sharing my top tips and tricks for success on the VCE French exam. To introduce myself briefly, I studied VCE French back in 2016, receiving a study score of 50 and a Premier's Award for the subject. I've maintained my passion for French ever since, having served as a cultural ambassador for the Alliance Française and having co-authored the Cambridge Checkpoint Study Guide for French that many of you may have used in your preparation for the exam this year. Before I go into the substantive content of my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that this year has undoubtedly been a very stressful and challenging one, and you should all be commended on your hard work and determination throughout the uncertainty of COVID-19. Keep up this positive attitude to your studies, and you'll be sure to achieve your goals and aspirations come exam time in November. I'd now like to share some advice and strategies for tackling the French exam. Of course, none of this advice is one size fits all, but I do hope that at least some aspects of it will be useful for you in preparing for and tackling the final exam. So let's start with the oral exam. I think the crux of success here is to remember that the oral exam is a genuine conversation, in other words, an exchange of ideas. To this end, while preparation is certainly very important, spontaneity is absolutely key and is what, in my view, ultimately differentiates the best students. Equally, remember that you have a lot of autonomy to direct the conversation to those areas that you feel most confident in discussing. Try to think about the connections you can make between different topics when undertaking practice orals. And a good strategy is to build a mind map of the ways in which a typical conversation could evolve. A final tip, record and listen to your practice orals regularly, with your teacher if possible. Be open to feedback and keep working to improve in the lead up to the actual exam. As for the discussion section, given that this is a new component of the exam this year as part of the new study design, it's perhaps challenging for you to know what to expect. My advice to you would be to research your topic in depth and support your ideas and opinions with evidence from your visual stimulus material. And remember that this visual stimulus must consist solely of one image, with no writing and with the image being no larger than A3 size. Moreover, the assessors like to see that you can draw thoughtful syntheses and comparisons, for example, between French and Australian culture or across time periods. So it's particularly useful to learn the vocabulary specific to expressing points of view and making connections and comparisons. For example, linking words. Think words and phrases like cependant, néanmoins, toutefois, par ailleurs, and so forth. And this is something that the teachers speaking will emphasize and explore in greater depth during their presentations. Moving on to the written exam. What's evident this year is the strong focus on writing across all sections of the paper. So take the opportunity to practice writing both longer essays and shorter responses throughout the lead up to the exam. Try out a range of styles, text types, and topics, and get a gauge of which areas you're most confident in and which ones you might need some more practice with. And of course, it goes without saying that fluency with grammar and vocabulary is the backbone of effective writing. Keep practicing these basic skills in the lead up to the exam because they will pay dividends during the actual paper. And finally, some section-by-section tips for the written exam. For the listening section, remember that you'll have two texts, one requiring answers in English and one requiring answers in French. My top tip for this section is to take effective notes that are targeted to the content of the questions. Also, stay focused and avoid distractions during the planes, because you only have a few chances to get all the required information. When responding in French, make sure to respond in full sentences, because there are marks allocated not only for the content of your answers, but for how effectively you communicate information in French. Keep a positive attitude and don't worry if you miss something. Just focus on grasping the overall content of the passages and the information that's most relevant for answering the questions. A final piece of advice, something I found very useful in preparing for the listening section, was to undertake practice dictation exercises in class on passages of increasing complexity. This will help you become more attuned to the phonetics and pronunciation of the French language, thus allowing you to transcribe a spoken text far more easily and effectively. As for section 2, I think this section will undoubtedly be one of the most challenging parts of the exam this year. Having to combine and synthesize information from two texts, one spoken and one written, is without doubt a formidable task. My advice for this component would be to first carefully read the written text and the questions to gain a holistic view of their text and their associated context and content. You'll find that some questions will be specific to a single text, while others will require you to compare and contrast across the two texts. And for the latter type of question, I think it will be very useful for you to look through the notes that you've written during the playing of the listening text and identify which aspects support or negate the contention of the written piece. As for section 2b, this task will require a short written response of around 150 words based on a written text. Typically, you'll have to support or rebut an author's contention. For example, you might be given an article on homeschooling and have to write an email to your parents to advise them against homeschooling your younger sibling. The key with this task, in my view, is to effectively build on the ideas in the text, but also respond to them in a creative and original way. So essentially, rework the material in the text in your own words and use linking words or connectors to sequence your thoughts. Think of this task as a mini essay and respect text type and stylistic conventions. A final tip, for preparation, make sure to look through the reading section of the exams from the old study design from 2016 to 2019, which all had tasks of this type. Finally, for section 3, the writing section, read through all the prompts, preferably during reading time, and carefully think about which one conforms to your strengths the most. Plan your essay before starting to write, and make sure that you've satisfied all text type requirements, especially for genres such as the formal letter, which are very intensive on text type conventions. Try to leave some spare time for proofreading. You'll be surprised at how many careless errors you can pick up with just a cursory look over your writing. Make sure to vary your vocabulary and grammatical structures over the course of your piece, but avoid force-fitting particular constructions, for example, idiomatic expressions of the subjunctive. As a final general piece of advice, I've found that the qualities of good writing are universal across languages, in that your goal is always to create a cohesive and effective piece that showcases your skills as a thinker and a writer. So that concludes my presentation, and I hope that you find this advice useful as you prepare for the French exams. I wish you all bon courage and the very best of luck for both the exams and your future studies. Thank you very much.